This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hiya, just a really quick message from me. I'd really love to ask for a little favor from those listening and watching. So wherever you're listening, wherever you're watching on, whatever platform it is, please do hit the subscribe button. This really, really helps the Voice of Early Childhood to continue putting out those thought-provoking episodes and continue making sure that we share those diverse voices and give you the topics and guests that you want to hear from. And for those of you who already subscribe, thank you very much. This helps so much. And everyone, thank you for listening, watching, and supporting the Voice of Early Childhood. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica Solinska. I'm your host, and today we are talking about communication and language in early childhood today, which is an important topic to discuss, but it's also the name of the recently published book from Tanya, Richardson, and Julie Kent, who are with us on this episode. It's a pleasure to have you both on.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
So, Tanya Richardson is a senior lecturer in early childhood at the University of Northampton, and Julie Kent is a senior lecturer in childhood at Nottingham Trent University. So, let's set the scene here because this must be the inspiration behind writing the book and talking about this area of children's development for you both. Because in your article, you write that the area of language development is considered to be a public health problem. So this is quite a big statement. Would you like to tell us more about this and unpick this a little bit?
Yeah, Tanya, shall I go with that to start with? I think this is, for me, it's been an interesting part of my research and a thread that we've followed throughout the book. This idea that actually what happens in early childhood has implications for later in life. So we see communication and language absolutely as a prime area of development within the EYFS. We see it as a central area to children's learning, and it's a developmental issue, especially when children have speech, language and communication needs or a delay in their speech and language in any way. But over the last few years, particularly within the speech and language therapy profession, which is my professional background, there's an understanding that actually what happens in the early years to children, and if they have delays and some difficulties with their early speech, language and communication, this actually has long-term impacts for not just their education, but actually the whole of their life, including things like their attainment, their later employability, for example, and even their health and well-being. So it leads to aspects of vulnerability which impact on the later life chances. And that concept of public health is about the things that we do to help people with their lives to make sure that they have the best outcomes that they can possibly have across all aspects of their own personal development. So that's where the concept of public health really comes from. I hope that explains that.
I think it's considered to be such an issue at the moment, just because of the sheer numbers of children that are having difficulties in the area. So Speech and Language UK, which is a charity that's prevalent within the country, is reporting that currently 1.9 million children have got difficulties with speech and language. So we are at a position where it's not just the odd child that's having difficulties, there's a lot. And that kind of makes us want to sit back and look at that and think, firstly, why? And secondly, what can we do about it as professionals? So that's where the book came from, really.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I guess it's important to consider the fact that what we're talking about here and the book as well is not just for those educators, parents or carers with children who are struggling with their language, it is actually for everyone. So it's important to support children's speech, language, and communication from birth, or maybe even before birth, and to continue supporting children who are already who may have a good level of speech, language, and communication, to ensure that they are supported further. So it's not just we're talking about this. Obviously, we need to address, the statistics and the issues here, but it's also important for those parents, for instance, who might be listening and thinking, how do I support my child with speech and language? And understand that there's always things that you can do and continue doing to support your child, because I guess, as we can see with COVID-19, their children have regressed in their development, and we can see that. We can see the evidence in that through our practice, and I guess through research as well. And children can develop language delays later on, I guess.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Language is such a social thing, isn't it? And I think I suffer with tonsillitis quite regularly, and when I've got no voice, I find it really hard to be part of a group and to be present almost.
Mm-hmm.
Voice is such and communication, not necessarily just spoken word, but the way that we communicate is just such an important part of our life. And we need to support children the best way we possibly can to be confident and able communicators.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from our perspective, what we're saying in this book and in our own research is that there's a space in children's earliest years in the home learning environment and in the rich environment in an early years setting where good universal practice supports all children. So we're not saying there are some specific children who've got needs that need to be targeted. What we're saying is there is a space where, good practice will enable all children to develop, really good communication and language. So we're thinking about, prior to any diagnosed special educational needs, for example, absolutely what you were saying, that all children benefit from those insights that we have as practitioners and also as parents to make the environment as conducive as possible to developing good communication skills.
Mm-hmm. So we've kind of set the scene around the problems here, I guess, and what needs to be addressed. But what can we do about it? And, you just said about ensuring that there's high quality, and in your article you write about high quality interactions and high quality environments, or in this case, language rich environments. So let's unpick that, especially for those who may have not heard of these terms before, don't quite know what that means, particularly parents who are listening, or maybe educators who are qualifying. So let's maybe start with high quality environments, because then an environment is not just physical, it's also emotional. So that will probably lead into those high quality interactions. So what is a high quality or language rich environment?
That's my PhD research. That's what I've been studying for the last 10 years is what does constitute a language-rich, high-quality environment for speech and language, because that term language-rich environment gets bandied about.
Yes.
Definitely. And nobody really knows. There's nothing that says anywhere particularly, and kind of evidence-based, research-based, what that looks like. So that's what I trotted after research when I was doing my doctoral studies. And that's still a work in progress and probably will be for the rest of my life, to be honest. But there are various elements within an environment, and take the interactions out of it completely, because and talk about that separately in a minute. But what my research found is that there are various things within an environment, and that can be how, like, the sound levels within an environment, books that are kind of available. It can be the ability for children to sing and dance. It can be the ability for children to choose what they play with and the space that they play in. There are all sorts of elements that can come together to make the perfect environment. So kind of watch this space really on the that side of things, because it's all my work is currently. I'm talking about PhD, and a PhD is a massive project, but in the grand scheme of things, on a research perspective, it's actually really quite small. So currently, work is underway to kind of really prove that what I think makes a quality environment, based on my small piece of research, actually does apply. So when that's ready, we could do another podcast.
Sure.
It's setting up an environment where children feel comfortable, I think, is the fundamental kind of bare bones of it, if you like. And that's another part, I think. I would argue that there's 3 parts to this kind of perfect picture, in that there's the high quality environment, the high quality interactions, and that embodiment, if you like, in that space, that children have got to feel comfortable, and they've got to feel grounded, and they've got to feel able and willing to talk, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting, that sense of being able and willing, in a place where you know you're going to be listened to, and somebody's taking an interest in you, and somebody is tuning into you. And I mean, that's a sort of theoretical concept, the idea of attunement, but it's a really strong practice-based concept. You know, when children know that there are people there who are listening, they're more likely to want to communicate. And communication, again, goes beyond just spoken language. Tanya mentioned that, but that sense of someone who listens and tunes in and understands. So even if a child is not very verbal, tuning into some of their non-verbal attempts to communicate. And you know yourself, in a place where you feel confident and comfortable, you're more likely to open up. And that takes time, and takes time for a relationship to build. And we feel, I think both of us feel, that the relational aspect is really central to practice. And I know we have the key person relationship, and obviously you have a parental relationship with a child. But actually, there's aspects of time and space that intrude on some of those interactions, and make it, very difficult for children to feel that maybe the world is passing by and nobody's really paying attention to them.
And I guess it's very much more than just the resources, which is usually what we talk about, as you said, Tanya, when we talk about a language-rich environment, and that, like you said, that phrase gets thrown around. And yes, we think resourcing the environment, and there's a lot we can do there, but it's so much more, like you're talking about, with that relational aspect. And also, I just want to mention, when you talked about your PhD, and you said, it's a work in progress, and that just made me think, actually, yes, it, not just a PhD, which generally is anyway, but this area as well, this topic of and defining what's a high quality language environment. It's always changing, evolving, progressing as we evolve in society. With technology is probably the biggest example, and our own understanding and research and relationships. And it's always, what you may define as a language-rich environment today will probably be different in another few years' time, won't it?
Not too different, so I have to start with it again. But I think the people, because regardless of what an environment has in it, if you haven't got somebody to converse with, somebody that you're comfortable to converse with, that's not the same, is it? I love the analogy that Julie Fisher uses about conversing, and that kind of what we're talking about, that embodiment and feeling valued, as you were saying just there. As she talks about conversation, and that kind of conversation in the widest sense being about a activity where you're passing a ball backwards and forwards between individuals. And if a child passes you a ball, that analogy being that a child talks to you, they want you to pass it back. They don't want you to say, no thanks, I don't want to play with that ball, or I'll pass that ball and throw it over somewhere else. They want you to carry on that game, if you like. And I think that, to me, is one of the, although I look at environments, we can't get away from the fact, the importance of that ball game and that interaction that goes alongside what's happening in the environment.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of material out there now that talks about the serve and return And the child, and it's almost waiting for the child to serve. But if the child's got something that they want to talk about, that's the other thing. It's their experiences. If they have something that they want to talk about, that's some of our responsibility there, isn't it? To actually provide those experiences that gives them something to talk about. And again, if you think about our conversations, we don't often talk about things we already know about. We're interested in finding out something different, aren't we? So quite often in practice, it's very easy to come up and just kind of ask questions that we think will meet, I don't know, a requirement. So to tick a box, for example, to say, oh, what colour's that? Well, we don't often ask in the adult world. I don't ask Tanya questions that I know the answer to. And sometimes as adults, we make that kind of, we fall into that trap of checking, or almost our language is testing children, and we're asking questions that we already know the answer to, whereas actually being genuinely curious, and that's the Julie Fisher analogy, that sense of really being interested in finding out something that we don't already know from that child. And maybe it's quite hard to understand what they might be saying, but really making the effort, rather than just saying, oh, what are you doing? Or what colour is that? Yeah, how many cars have you got? Those sorts of things. It's much more of interest to the child for you to be genuinely curious about what they're actually doing.
And that goes beyond what we would normally say of don't ask closed-ended questions, ask an open-ended question. And yes, that's what you're saying here. That's the basics of it. But actually what you're saying is taking it even further and saying about having that genuine curiosity that the child can actually tell that you are interested. And then it goes back to what you were saying, there is someone there that is interested in having that conversation. There's that attunement. There's someone who's willing to listen, tune into your needs, to understand you. And that just, I guess when we think about that as adults, when someone is genuinely interested, we could tell if someone just asks a question and we feel like they just had to ask it to tick a box to kind of appear like they're interested and not rude. But actually when someone genuinely asks and almost like shares that space with you and that and is present, I guess. And it just sounds like so many of the things that we're talking about here are really tapping into well-being as well. And it's not just language, although communication, language, speech is so broad, but it's all very holistic, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, and it is a bit of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? Are you more sociable, and does your well-being improve because you can communicate, or do you communicate because your well-being and your social skills are good? It is one of those. Yeah, which bit works?
Affect each other so much.
No, definitely. And every area of development is linked to communication and language, really. It impacts, the more you move, the more you talk. Research has shown that. So if you're restricted physically, then generally, obviously generalising, communication is affected, and vice versa. So if you're sociable, if you can talk, then probably you're more likely to be asked to join in a football match at school, and all of those things are connected, and showing the importance really of why Julie and I do what we do.
And I think that point about the physical and the spoken, those two parts of the brain are next to each other. Movement, the motor skill area of the brain is right next to the language centre. And there's a lot of research now about how, enhancing children's physical activity, and particularly through the outdoors, giving them more opportunities. It's not just about the beauty or the outdoor space being an interesting place. It actually links, neurologically to using those parts of the brain. So we can see how physical action and speech and language go together as well.
And I guess throughout this podcast so far, we've been talking about the fact that parents or carers can support children's language as well as educators. So that home environment is really, really important. That's something that you focus on in the book as well. And in your article, you mention child-sensitive communication approaches. What does that mean? What does that look like?
I think for me, it's interesting. Some research that I've just done with parents. Sometimes they're looking for something very technical. They're looking for something very specialist, and they don't feel that their just general everyday communication is good enough. It's not going to be the thing. There must be a particular strategy, and sometimes it is just about having the confidence to chat, to sing with your child, not to lose touch with some of those old traditional skills, which, we kind of sometimes think, well, yes, but there must be something more academic than that. And actually, it isn't. It's often just playing, talking, giving a bit of a commentary to what your child's doing, singing again, really classic, very, very strong in helping children. And again, singing your own songs, your own cultural songs from whatever community you're from. It doesn't really matter kind of what you're singing, but it is that sense of, parents feeling confident that, it's not just, there's not a technique. It is just some of those day-to-day things which you do as a routine. And again, Tanya will probably talk a little bit about this, the regularity of something, the repetitive nature of those interactions as well.
Mm-hmm. I'd say that right from day one, or from conception, really, we know that, as the child is in the womb, they can hear. So it's talking to your baby right from early on. I've had parents say to me in the past, well, I don't really talk to them because they can't talk back. But no, they can't talk back, but it's all the start of them learning how communication is formed, the to and fro, that reciprocity of language in itself. So, when my children were little, I used to, they're in their bouncy chair while you're cooking the dinner, and I used to narrate constantly. I'm taking the knives out the dishwasher, and they probably thought, give it a rest. But I think that's a really important skill, and we're in an age at the minute where technology is kind of in every part of our life, and I think sometimes it's going back to the basics, as Julie said, putting the technology away, talking to the child, singing, dancing right from the start, not when they're two, when they're kind of up and dancing with you, but right from the beginning. Looking at books, really important. And again, looking at books together rather than having a pile of books in the corner of the room, talking while you're going around the shops, in the car, all of those things. At the dinner table, I think that's a bit of a dying art, the kind of sitting around the table together at the end of the day and sharing a meal. I asked my students recently, actually, because I was really intrigued about this. I did a bit of a straw poll and asked my students who were kind of first year, so they're 18, 19 generally, how many of them as a family, obviously not while they're at university, but generally, if they're in their family home, how many of them would sit around the table and have their dinner together? And I would say maximum of 10% said that that's what they did as a family. And, at the end of the day, when you share what's happened in your day and what's the good thing about it, that communication is what we need to, as I say, back to basics stuff, really.
And we know we know how busy life is, and actually a lot of families are under intense pressure, and it's not always easy to carve out those times. And again, if you're feeling low or you're feeling depressed or you're feeling anxious, and again, this links to public health and some of the vulnerabilities, it's not easy to keep that kind of conversation going. And that's one of the things we recognise, that, for many families, it isn't easy. Life takes over and life is difficult. And time is really hard. So it's just snatching those moments where you can, really.
And Tanya, when you were talking about the example of books as well, actually, and it again reminds me of the language-rich environment, and how we would say a language-rich environment is an environment that has a variety of books and texts around, around on the walls potentially, and things like that. But actually, it's no use if you're not going to read that book with the child, read the books, like you said, a pile of books in the corner. It's one thing having the books, but then it's using them together, interacting, those high quality interactions, the serve and return, modeling using the books as well, reading them, reading the pictures, not just the words and things like that. So I guess what you were both saying at the beginning, that is what a language rich environment means. And we couldn't really answer those questions of answer them separately of what's a language rich environment and what are high quality interactions. They come hand in hand and they can't be separated, can they?
Well, we appreciate that, like Julie was saying, parents are busy, so that you can't, and practitioners, if we're in a setting and we're on a 1:8 ratio, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
You can't be interacting with a child constantly. Mm-hmm. So the environment does need to be there. That third environment, the third teacher.
Third teacher, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Third teacher. The environment in early years terms is often referred to, isn't it, as the third teacher, and so the environment does need to support the language in the best way it can as well. So having the books is obviously better than not, but communicating and interacting with those is kind of the top notch. Mm-hmm. I suppose it's kind of gold, silver, bronze standard almost. So, but those resources need to be there, and the environment needs to be set up in a way that can facilitate children's learning and development. I'm talking more kind of in a earlier setting basis now, but it can apply to the home environment too. I think provocations are really important for children, and that kind of developing that sense of awe and wonder, giving things to children that they wouldn't necessarily see on a day-to-day basis. If your environment looks the same every day and it's got the same resources in it and the same feel to it every day, then how are we going to develop our vocabulary? How are we going to expand our experiences and what we know and what we talk about? I think if I've had a weekend where I haven't been anywhere, I haven't been out anywhere, I haven't done anything, you get to work on Monday and somebody says, "Did you have a nice weekend? What did you do?" And you haven't really got anything to say, have you? It was all right, thanks. Just, stay at home. Whereas if you go out and you've done things, or you've seen people, or you've had a new experience, immediately you've got more to talk about.
Yeah, of course.
I think parents, again, can feel under pressure that they've got to take their children, to the zoo or to pay to take them to soccer play. Again, absolutely, Tanya, we don't mean those sorts of things. In the garden, picking up things or push in the pushchair down to the high street. And again, books, we might not be able to afford, new books, but, leaflets, picking up any bit, of the freebies, with pictures on. Even going into the post office, there's leaflets you can pick up in there. Anything that's got pictures that you can talk about, and lots of places that you can just, even your routine of going to the high street every day can become an interesting thing, because it will change. There'll be somebody different with a different dog, or the shop window will have changed, or there'll be maybe a new posters up or something like that. So there is always something new to talk about. And I think it's just being aware of the fact that it doesn't have to be costly to do some of those things.
Yeah, and things like this is really important for educators to have the knowledge and experience to be able to communicate with the parents or carers and support them with. But I guess in the first place, the educators need to have that knowledge and experience, as I said, and also feel confident enough in their own understanding of this area that they can, one, support the child and also support the family as well. So I know that you also talk about the fact that educators need to feel, again, confident, empowered, be well trained. And of course we have that, and this is what you mentioned in the article as well, the issue in early years with the recruitment and retention crisis, and educated, skilled educators who are not well paid, hence they're leaving the sector. We're losing educators who do have this good knowledge and the skills around supporting children's language development and everything else. So it is a difficult situation currently that we're finding in the sector, where I think it's difficult for everyone working within it to feel like they do have the expertise and they actually can do something about all of these issues kind of coming on, and they do feel empowered, because generally it's difficult to feel empowered when you don't feel like you kind of want to be there because of the pay, or the lack of educated and enthusiastic people around you, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that does come from the top. You've got to think about who's leading that setting, who's managing the setting, helping practitioners to feel that they are developing. So obviously they've got their qualifications level 3 or a level 2 or above level 3. And actually realizing the expertise that's embedded within those qualifications. So, having the opportunity to think, yeah, this is something that I have learned. I'm not just going to put it in, behind me, but to keep on developing and having, again, training is expensive to access, but giving space to places where the team can develop and develop itself, maybe. And when we've got some suggestions in the book about actually free CPD places to go to. Your podcast is a classic one, sort of setting the team time to listen to a podcast and then come back and feed that back to each other. That's free training that we don't always, take on board. And there are some amazing websites, again, that have got masses of wonderful material produced by speech and language therapists, actually, that are out there. If a manager gives half an hour's time to the team to kind of look at some resources and bring them together and say, well, how are we going to use these? It's kind of being creative, like you say, within the confines of what we know are the issues in the sector at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, I think we're all advocates, obviously, for a well-qualified workforce. We know that benefits children. That said, children, in our settings, don't care what qualification or certificate somebody's got. What they really worry about is somebody that cares for them. Coming back full circle to what we were talking about earlier on, is that somebody that cares for them, wants to listen to them, wants to play with them. And I think that is the side of the retention and recruitment issue, maybe, that has more impact on children on a day-to-day basis, particularly when I'm thinking about speech and language, in that the practitioners are so stretched. They don't have the time necessarily to, play, and that's what children need. I'll keep going back to basics, but children need to play. They need somebody to read them the book in the book corner. They need somebody to sing with them, not something on a screen that sings to them. They need that interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's as you mentioned, going back to basics a lot of the time, and that training also, Julie, as you said, it doesn't necessarily need to be very formal and certainly not expensive training. It can be picking up the free snippets of resources that you might find online and then reading them and discussing them and having shared reflections and thinking critically and encouraging that, I guess, leaders encouraging that of educators, and to think deeper. If you've read something, even if it's just a paragraph somewhere, or you've seen something, even if it's just on the news or online, being, as I always say, being critical consumers. Even if we see something, the younger educators might see something on TikTok or Instagram and actually saying, well, what does that mean for us? What can we take from this? Is this research backed, or what might this be suggesting? And just being a lot more, I guess, critical, and that probably means open-minded as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think there are academics out there now who have much more of an online presence and are doing more snippets, aren't they, on social media that are much more easily accessible. They don't have to go into one of our old dry papers to find some of this stuff. If you know where to look, and like you say, some of the younger practitioners are out there anyway on the social media and are picking things up and can bring that back as a CPD, activity. For sure.
Well, there are apps out there now to support children's development or give ideas for development, developmental activities, etc. So, it's kind of using what people need to use, I suppose, meet them where they are.
I mean, one of the ones we mentioned quite a lot in the book is Tiny Happy People.
Oh,
It's
yes.
written by speech and language therapists. It's actually also been written by some of the social sciences team at Nottingham Trent, some of my
Oh, really?
colleagues who've been involved in the development of that app and of that site. But there's got sections for professionals, for parents, and it's exactly a public health model. The public health model is it's something that's out there for everybody to have an impact in the early years that will have a long-standing impact for children. And it is absolutely packed. It's very easy to navigate. It's beautifully put together. It's got broken down into ages. It's broken down into it has got some targeted ideas on it, but it is mainly just here are some activities, printable things, things that you can use day to day as a parent and also as a practitioner. So I'd highly recommend that website.
It sounds like a brilliant resource, and then of course your new book as well, and I'm just looking at all of the different I guess chapters, and there's a few contributors as well, isn't there, which is really great to see, and a variety of areas to delve into, from like looking at the digital landscape to outdoor pedagogy, global perspectives, of course, as we mentioned already, working with parents. So there's so much there to delve into, and it's great that it is very current as well. So like I mentioned just now, technology, global perspectives, and making sure that we're not just looking at the the English context. What can we learn from other contexts as well, and looking at children with English as an additional language. And of course, you mentioned there as well, speech and language therapists. So that multi-agency approach is really, really important. So it does sound like there's so much to really delve into in this book, and it's really exciting. And I guess for all those who are listening as well, it's important to know that the official book launch is on the 8th of February, and that's at the Voice of Early Childhood conference, which is really great, because I'm just sat here and I keep thinking I really want to have get my hands on the physical copy of the book, because I've just looked at it online and those chapters, but there's nothing like having the physical copy, is there? That's the most special thing. So everyone who's listening, you can get the chance to meet Tanya and Julie in person at the conference if you're attending, and maybe even get a book signed as well, which is exciting. And of course, enter the prize draw for a free copy as well. So everyone, who's listening, watching, you can find out more about this. The link is in the episode description for the conference page to find out more on how to get involved. And also Tanya's and Julie's article is on the Voice of Early Childhood website. So I think this is probably a good place to kind of wrap up, and just to say that it would be great to hear more from you, and even Julie, Tanya, you mentioned your PhD research, and it would be kind of great to hear more about your work, Julie, as well, and the fact that you mentioned Tiny Happy People there, and that the colleagues from Nottingham Trent University worked on that as well. That's really interesting. It just seems like there's so many interesting avenues here to take and discuss more and more. And like we said at the beginning, it's always this area, and much like a lot of other research, is always a work in progress, evolving, changing, as we all evolve and as research evolves and our understandings move on. So to echo what you said earlier, Tanya, watch this space.
Yeah, indeed.
It's been brilliant to have you both on.
It's been great to chat.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been really good to talk to you, and hopefully some people will come to the conference and come to our table. We have a special table with a prize draw and a chance to chat to us as well. So that'd be great.
Yeah, looking forward to having you both there.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.